Hello and good day. We welcome you to this webinar of the NAMA facility. My name is Sören David. I'm the head of the TSU, the Technical Support Unit of the NAMA facility, and I will be moderating today's session. We're excited to share some insights into the fifth call of the NAMA facility with you in the course of the next hour. The webinar will, as usually, also be recorded and made available as an audio file on our website at nama/fertility.org. It's great to yet again see participants from all over the world who registered and are now attending. There are more than 250 participants today. Thank you all very much for joining in. This is the first of two webinars to provide information on the submission of outlines for the fifth call of the NAMA facility. We intend to hold the next webinar on fifth call clarifications and frequently asked questions on the 31st of January next year. We will invite you separately to this occasion. The objective of today's webinar is to provide an introduction to the NAMA facility, its fifth call, and the steps required to submit an outline. The fifth call was launched some 2 weeks ago by the NAMA facility donors at the occasion of COP23 in Bonn, and the call will close on 15th of March next year. Please keep this essential deadline in mind. On this first slide, you can see the TSU colleagues who are involved in today's webinar. Starting to the left is Zach, followed by myself, Tina, Ash, and finally Janka. Tina and Zach are in charge of the technical functioning of this webinar. Janka, Ash, and Zach will guide us through the content and answer your questions in the Q&A sessions, while I'll be moderating the webinar. I would now like to give you an overview on today's agenda. In a moment, Zach will provide information on the technical settings of the webinar. Following that, as the first part of today's webinar, I will provide you with a short introduction to the NAMA facility and the fifth call. Janka will then present this webinar's second part, detailing fifth call processes and timeline. In part 3, Ash will introduce the assessment criteria applied in the selection process. And finally, in the fourth part, Zach will guide you through the outline template itself. After each section, from the second to the fourth, we will have time for some Q&As, which we would like to keep to around 5 minutes each. Questions posed but not addressed in this short period of time will be answered individually after the webinar and, where suitably, be part of clarification notes. Well, then let's get started. Zach, please be so kind to guide us through some technical aspects of this webinar.
Thank you, Søren, and hello, everyone. First, I would like to provide a quick introduction to this webinar's control panel, which you can see here on the right of the PowerPoint slide. Feel free to follow along on the screen as I'll be walking you through using the mouse. Let's take a look at some of the control panel settings. First, you can hide the control panel using this button. Second, your mute status is located here. However, due to the high number of participants, we've placed everyone on mute and you will not be able to unmute yourself. Third, you can view the webinar in full screen using this button. This could be useful as the sessions will be accompanied by a presentation. And fourth, you can adjust the language of the control panel using the globe icon, which you will find on the top of the control panel. There's also a questions tab where we ask that you submit any questions you may have throughout the session. To do so, open the questions tab and type your question in the window. We, the webinar hosts, will be the only ones who can see it, and we will answer the questions in the Q&A sessions after each section. So please, submit them beforehand. In the event that there are more questions that we can't answer today, we will answer those questions after the webinar and publish them on our website, together with the recording of this webinar. And finally, in this webinar's presentation, there are several links included that you can click on. These will also be working and available in the uploaded PDF of this presentation together with a recording of the webinar. I will now hand things back over to Søren for a brief introduction to the NAMA facility.
Thank you, Zach. Now let's turn to the first part of today's agenda, where I will briefly introduce you to the NAMA facility. NAMA facility supports developing countries and emerging economies in implementing nationally appropriated mitigation actions, called NAMAs, to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in the sector as building blocks for the realization of nationally determined contributions, in short NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. Supported NAMAs should demonstrate that they are country-led and embedded in national development strategies and plans, and they should also demonstrate how they are integrated into sector-wide programs or policies. We expect that each NAMA can demonstrate an explicit reference to the country's nationally determined contribution. For inducing transformational change in this sector, the NAMA should tackle wider policy, regulatory or other barriers that limit investments and constrain low carbon development. As the focus of the NAMA facilities is on the implementation of NAMAs, supported NAMAs should demonstrate how they are developing and applying innovative financing mechanisms with the potential to attract public and private investment. They should equally work to become self-sustaining in the medium to long term. Please also note a link at the bottom of this slide, which takes you to the new NAMA facility publication outlining some of the most important features of our work. As the NAMA facility, we support the implementation of NAMA support projects, or NSPs, as the most ambitious part of overarching sector-wide NAMAs. It is thus important to stress that the NAMA facility does not have the capacities to fund a NAMA as such. Additional financial means from partner governments, bank, and private sources will need to be attracted. Funding for NSPs is provided to cover both financial and technical measures. NSPs must cover an implementation period between 3 to 5 years. The requested NAMA facility funding must, with few exceptions to which we will get in the later part of the webinar, be in the range of 5 to 20 million euros. NSPs are selected in annual competitive bidding rounds, the so-called calls, which are organized by the TSU. Key requirements for the selection of individual NSPs are that the NAMAs are ready for implementation, have a substantial mitigation potential, and can ensure transformational change in the sector in which they intervene. It is important to note that the NAMA facility sets no sectoral nor regional focus in its calls. NAMA facility is a multi-donor fund that was established in 2013. Its founders are the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, the BMUB, and the British Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, BASE. The Danish Ministry of Climate and Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the European Commission joined the NAMA facility subsequently in 2015 as additional donors. With the additional funding for the fifth call, the overall funding earmarked for the NAMA facility now amounts to approximately 347 million euros. While donors take all strategic decisions, the NAMA facility is run on a daily basis by the TSU as the NAMA facilities secretariat. We are based here in Berlin, from where we are speaking today. The current portfolio of the NAMA facility comprises 20 NAMA support projects, which have been identified in the first 4 calls of the NAMA facility. Great, so that was a quick general overview of the NAMA facility. Let's now dive right into the fifth call details. As mentioned already, the fifth call for NAMA support project outlines was launched earlier this month. Donors intend to make available the largest funding volume for an individual call so far by providing up to 85 million euros for the implementation of the selected projects. After major changes in our previous call, There is good news for those who have followed the NAMA facility for some time. In fifth call, there are only minor changes to the process and its document compared to the fourth call. We continue to follow the guiding principles of simplified documentation, an enlarged circle of eligible applicants, and enhanced support for the preparation of projects. However, we would like to stress one point. The expectation level and substance of requirements remain high, and the selection process remains rigorous. Nonetheless, our aim is to assist you as good as possible in establishing successful outlines by providing necessary clarifications, documents, webinars, fact sheets, and other kinds of information. We will now proceed with the second part of this webinar, which covers the fifth call processes and timeline presented by Janka. But before that, last but not least, please remember to submit your questions throughout this webinar as they arise, so that we may address them during the Q&A sessions. Janka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Søren, and hello, everybody. Before we go into details of who can apply and how the process looks like, I would like to remind you that all the aspects we will explain today are also written down in the NAMA Facilities General Information Document, which is, so to say, the manual and central source of information for the fifth call. We try to keep this document as short and concise as possible, so please take a closer look, as we cannot cover all the details in this webinar. It is also important for applicants, it is also worth noting for applicants that we have provided a French and Spanish courtesy translation this time on our website. At the end of our presentation, you will find all the links to the relevant documents. Now, turning to the processes and timeline, let's first have a look at the overall process in the fifth call of the NAMA facility. As you can see on the slide, the process is sequenced. You find the legend for the respective actors on the upper left-hand side. Starting from the lower side on the left, you can see the stage that we are currently in. After the donors have announced the launch of the fifth call at the COP23, the call is now open until 15th of March, 3 p.m. Central European Time. With the launch of the fifth call, all documents relevant for the fifth call have been uploaded to the website of the NAMA facility. While the call is open, the Technical Support Unit, the TSU, conducts 2 webinars. Actually, this is the first one today, and we will publish also clarification notes. I will come back on this issue later. While the call is open, national ministries and qualified legal entities are invited to prepare NAMA support projects, NSPs, and submit respective outlines to the TSU latest on 15th of March 2018. After the submission deadline, an external assessor team will be in the lead to review all eligible submissions in an initial assessment. The TSU team will assess the outlines in parallel and share its observations with the external assessor team. In the next part of the webinar, my colleague Ash will introduce you to the selection criteria that the NAMA facility applies in this assessment process. Based on the initial assessment results and recommendations, the donors, our donors of the NAMA facility, decide on the shortlist of NSPs. These shortlisted NSPs are further assessed during on-site assessments that are conducted by an external assessor and a TSU member. The donors then take a decision which NSPs are invited to further detail their NSP during the so-called detailed preparation phase, in short, DPP, and receive for this financial support from the NAMA facility. The ultimate output of the DPP is a detailed proposal for the NSP. Please note that the donor's decision on providing funding for the DPP does not mean that the NSP automatically receives also funding for its implementation. At the start of the DPP, a grant agreement is concluded. the provision of funding for the DPP will be linked to the demonstration of sufficient progress and the achievements of crucial milestones during the DPP. There is a cap to the maximum duration of the DPP, and that is 18 months. But depending on the state of preparations, NSPs, of course, can also propose shorter durations for the DPP. At the end of the DPP, the fully fledged proposal for the NSP is submitted to the NAMA facility. The proposal undergoes a thorough assessment by the TSU with support from external assessors. Only those proposals that show sufficient quality will be recommended to the donors for funding of the actual implementation. Based on the findings and recommendations, donors eventually take a decision on whether to approve the NSP for implementation and to provide the requested funding. Once approved, the NSP starts its implementation, which lasts 3 to 5 years. During the implementation, a close interaction between the TSU and the NSP continues. The NAMA facility understands itself as a learning hub. Thus, it wants to build up experiences on financing NAMA implementation and avail these lessons learned to a broader audience like the global climate community. An important question to many of you is probably who can actually submit an outline. With this chart, we want to clarify the different roles during the outline phase, the proposal phase or detailed preparation phase, and the implementation phase. Let us first look at the outline phase on the left side. An outline can be submitted by a national ministry that is responsible for climate change and UNFCCC negotiations. The outline could also be submitted by a national ministry in charge of the sector that is targeted by the NAMA. When a national ministry is the applicant and submits the outline, we request that it identifies in parallel a qualified legal entity as the so-called applicant support partner. If the NSP is selected by the donors, the applicant support partner will become the contracting partner for the NAMA facility funding support provided for the detailed preparation phase. As I mentioned before, the detailed preparation phase is to ultimately result in the development and submission of a fully fledged proposal for the NSP. An applicant support partner is required because the NAMA facility unfortunately cannot directly channel its funding to a national ministry. By the way, for those familiar with the previous fourth call, the applicant support partner was then called co-applicant. That term had caused some confusion in our last call, so we tried to come up with a clearer term for the fifth call. Now, turning back to the question, who else can submit an outline? An alternative option is that a qualified legal entity functions as the applicant and submits the outline to the NAMA facility. In this case, the legal entity must demonstrate the backing and endorsement of the relevant national ministries, that is, the ministry responsible for climate change and the relevant sector ministry. As in the case before, the legal entity becomes the contracting partner for the funding support provided by the NAMA facility for the DPP. Yes. Who is considered a qualified legal entity? We have listed all the formal capacity requirements for legal entities in our general information document in section 5.1. You are strongly encouraged to take a look at them. Let me nevertheless give you some examples of legal entities that could be eligible. These include national, regional, international development banks, UN or agencies, bilateral and multilateral development agencies, non-governmental organizations, foundations, public utilities, national public agencies, public think tanks with a non-for-profit status. If one legal entity cannot fulfill all the capacity requirements listed in the GID, in the General Information Document, It may also consider forming a consortium with another entity or even several entities. In this case, it is very important to identify a lead partner and clearly delineate the roles of partners in the consortium. During the detailed preparation phase, the legal entity should very closely coordinate and cooperate with the relevant national ministries, with key implementing partners in the country, and with the legal entity that is foreseen as the NAMA Support Organization, in short, NSO. The NSO will become the contracting partner for the implementation of the NSP. By the end of the DPP, the NSP of the detailed preparation phase, the NSP is expected to be ready for implementation. That includes, in our understanding, a ready for implementation financial mechanism. This readiness should be demonstrated in a high quality detailed proposal. In our experience, many NSPs struggle to develop a sound financial mechanism, and sometimes they also struggle to develop a consistent project design. Because of this, the TSU offers additional support from a so-called DPP expert pool during the detailed preparation phase. This pool of experts includes international financial experts that have a professional background with financial institutions. It also includes experts on project development and design. If an NSP decides to use the services of the DPP expert pool, it should indicate so in its outline. As the DPP expert pool has been already set up by us, its services are immediately available from the beginning of the DPP phase, so that the NSP does not lose any time in finding a good expert. Now, once the fully fledged proposal is elaborated within the agreed time frame of the DPP, the proposal should be submitted to the NAMA facility by a qualified legal entity that will act as the NAMA Support Organization, or NSO. As I mentioned before, the NSO will become the contracting partner for implementation if the project is approved for implementation by our donors. When the NSO submits the proposal, it needs to also demonstrate that it has the full endorsement from the relevant ministries. As we are talking about a significant funding volume in the range of 5 to 20 million euro provided by the NAMA facility to the NSP, we apply more demanding capacity requirements to the NSO than we apply to the applicant. They are also listed in our general information document, so have a look. However, the NAMA facility will not disqualify any outline submission in the first initial outlines phase for not proposing a NSO, a NAMA support organization, or proposing a non-eligible, non-qualified NSO. In these cases, a suitable NSO needs to be identified during the first 3 months of the DPP. As announced before, I would like to draw your attention to another issue related to the fifth call. The TSU provides an opportunity for anyone interested to submit questions on the fifth call in writing to our contact mail. We will address these questions during this and the upcoming webinar on 31st of January. We will also issue monthly clarification notes and publish these on our website. On this slide, you can actually see the schedule of publication dates. Since we want to ensure a transparent and fair competitive call, the TSU will not provide clarifications with regard to the will only, of course, provide clarifications with regard to the interpretation of the general information document and application documents, but will not provide any NSP-specific advice, like on individual NSP concepts or proposed partner structures. Now, as this is probably a lot of information for most of you, I will stop here and would just like to remind the audience that you can also find all the information on our website and in particularly in the general information document.
Thanks, Jakob, very much for this comprehensive overview on who can submit outlines and the process and timeline. While we were talking, a number of questions have already been posted in the chat window. let me remind you the questions that come in today, but also written questions to the NAMA facilities email address will be addressed in clarification notes that we will publish every month. And the first one is scheduled to be coming out on the 7th of December. So Janka, let me pick up the first question that came in actually today, and I'd like to read it out. So one participant is asking whether the NAMA needs to be registered with the NAMA registry at UNFCCC.
No. The NAMA facility does not request such a registration in the NAMA registry. However, so it is not a precondition for submitting an application to the fifth call. However, the NAMA facility collaborates with the UNFCCC Secretariat also on this registry and encourages all the selected NSPs to at least register their support that they have received from the NAMA facility.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And maybe related to that point, here's a follow-up question. One participant would like to know whether a project needs to be labeled a NAMA in order to be eligible. Is that necessary?
Oh, that is a good question, and that comes up quite frequently, actually. And the answer is no, it is not necessary. So it could be also referred to a program, initiative, or any other term. The important thing is not so much the name for us, but it is the content. So the NAMA facility looks for NAMA support projects that can trigger transformational change across the sector and that have a strong country buy-in and leadership.
Okay, just taking some notes on another question there. Third question, which we would like to address here is what kind of legal status should the legal entity have that is acting as applicant or applicant support partner?
Well, the legal status should be a public benefit one. So it should be a public benefit organization. In fact, all applicants and applicant support partners actually need to demonstrate that all the funds provided by the NAMA facility serve and will be spent in line with a public benefit purpose. And we also want to stress that the funding support granted by the NAMA facility may not provide any economic advantage to neither the legal entity nor any of the implementing partners.
Okay, I think that's clear. Another question, you mentioned already the role of an external assessor team during the outline assessment. One participant wanted to know who will be the assessor this time around.
Well, actually, for those who are familiar with our process, we are currently in the process, the TSU is in the process of procuring these external assessor services, so to say. We know for sure that we are looking for experts that will have a professional background in climate finance, development, cooperation, and relevant sectors. So it's not identified yet.
All right. I think we have some time for at least 2-3 more questions. So another one which came in is the following. So one other participant has asked about opportunities for the private sector to engage in the current call. Could you maybe elaborate a bit how private sector could actually be part of a NAMA support project?
Well, I'll do my best. So we see from the past experience, we see that consultancies from the private sector are usually involved at several steps in our project cycle. They might, for instance, be engaged in the preparation of NAMAs and thus facilitating the development of a NAMA and even sometimes supporting the formulation of outlines. During the DPP, the detailed preparation phase, And also during the implementation of the NSPs, actually, applicants or the legal entities can also engage external service providers to work on specific tasks, like formulating the financial mechanism. As a rule, the legal entity is contracted by the is contracted by this. No, not the legal entity. Sorry, the private sector consultancy is contracted by the legal entity that is responsible for the DPP or NSP implementation, and this legal entity will then also conduct and oversee the tender process. On our side, on the TSU side, we are seeking private sector expertise, for instance, for the assessment processes we mentioned before, but also for monitoring, evaluation tasks, for communication tasks, and so on.
All right. In one of the previous slides, and we might wish to move up a bit in the slides, there was a chart on how the selection process looks like. Yeah, there it is. And what has not been explicitly mentioned here is the aspect of an on-site assessment. And one participant has been asking if this feature, which we newly introduced as part of the fourth call, will also feature in the fifth call. In other words, will there be an on-site assessment for those pre-selected projects?
Yes, I'd say it is not on this chart, but I mentioned it before. Yes, indeed, we kept this process. So shortlisted NSPs will undergo an on-site assessment.
All right.
So in the fifth call.
Okay, cool. And then equally with regard to the DPP, and here with regard to the length of the DPP, you already said that it can be anything between 6 to 18 months. And one participant would like to know what are determining factors for deciding on the length of the DPP, and who is actually making that call? Who is saying how long the DPP should be?
Well, it is the project submitter, the proponent, so the applicant, who's determining how long the DPP should be. We, from the TSU side, we will of course form our opinion on whether this is a feasible time horizon, but in the end, it is up to the applicant to come up and propose a duration. We just put the maximum length of the DPP.
All right, thanks very much. I believe that is also clear, and maybe just for illustrative purposes, we can also say at this stage that in the fourth call, we've seen the majority of projects in the DPP opting for a DPP in the range of close to a year. We had one which is substantially shorter, but most of them have a tendency to opt for approximately a year of DPP length. All right, thanks very much for that, Janka. I think we will get to this last question here, which I have still noted. So you mentioned the duration of the DPP and implementation phase. And once again, one request for clarification, which came from the chat here. It pertains to the question if the maximum of 5 years of implementation of the NAMA support project includes the DPP or not.
There's a simple answer, no, it is additional.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that, Janka. Your input is highly appreciated. You deserve a tea after the cold you are suffering from. Great. We are running a bit short of time, so let's move on to the next part on our agenda. Now that we have elaborated on the fifth call process and some of the minor changes from the fourth call to the fifth call, we will now focus on the outline stage, which in fact I believe may be the most relevant issue for most of you. And for that part, I'd like to welcome Ash, who will lead us through this session. Ash, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Søren, and hello to everyone. Similar to previous calls, once we receive the outlines, we apply a two-stage assessment process. The first step is an eligibility check mainly with formal criteria, especially those regarding the applicant, which we've already discussed. In particular, we draw your attention to the change in the funding volume. In the fifth call, the funding volume may exceptionally fall outside the range of 5 to 20 million euros, although a good rationale would be required for why that would happen, and also to the applicant eligibility criteria that have already been outlined. Please note that non-eligibility may lead to the outline not being taken forward in the assessment. So the second step is a qualitative evaluation and scoring of the presented outlines. For this qualitative aspect, we apply two equally weighted assessment criteria, ambition and feasibility. Both criteria are scored with a maximum of 25 points and are composed of a number of sub-criteria. Ambition is composed of the following sub-criteria: the potential for transformational change, financial ambition, and mitigation potential. And on this slide, you can see how many points are allocated to these criteria. You will see, for example, that transformational change is the most important ambition criteria. And even more so when you consider that financial ambition, which is actually a part of the transformation potential, as we define it, is such that we address it separately in order to give it a special focus. We attach a high importance to the NAMA support project's design, its rationale, and technical and financial characteristics. One change from the fourth call is the additional weighting given under feasibility to project rationale and design, and accordingly it's somewhat reduced under the DPP sub-criterion. Now, when we look at the ambition criteria, we would like to emphasize the transformational potential, which is in effect the raison d'etre of the NAMA facility. Now, we don't have a common definition of transformational change, but our interpretation includes a redirection of public and private funding towards the greenhouse gas mitigation activity, a paradigm shift, meaning a significant change of technology or behavior, a rapid shift, which means quicker than business as usual, an irreversible and permanent change, i.e. one that does not slip back to the situation before the project, and political embeddedness and political will that will regulate towards this low carbon development path. The detailed criteria are listed on this slide as per the general information document. We now move to financial ambition, which is the second ambition criteria. This, as I mentioned, can be considered part of the transformational change. The point we would make here is that the NAMA facility's funds are limited and can only make a small contribution to this sector transformation. Therefore, we would like to see a high leveraging of public and private funds from the contribution made by the NAMA facility. In the portfolio to date, we observe a leveraging ratio of over 1 to 7 across those NSPs, so that each euro of NAMA facility funding mobilizes an additional 7 euros of additional funding. It should be noted that the financial leverage should take into account factors such as the level of private sector engagement, the nature of end users, the sector, and the country. The detailed criteria are again listed here as per the GID, the General Information Document, but please do note that there is an intrinsic link between the transformational change and financing mechanisms. We don't elaborate on this in this webinar, but we would like you to refer to the webinars we've made previously on financial mechanisms, and these can be found on the NAMA facility's website. So moving on to the mitigation potential, you can see this is worth 8 points. We very much emphasize mitigation, and ultimately the low carbon trajectory can be best demonstrated by lower emissions in CO2 equivalent terms. We are very keen on getting realistic and soundly calculated emission reduction estimates that do not need to be revised down later in the proposal stage. Please also consider the so-called rebound effects in determining the mitigation potential. This is particularly crucial, for example, in cases targeting energy efficiency. Please note that we do not look only for absolute levels of emission reductions, because otherwise only a few middle-income countries and sectors would be eligible for the facility's funding. We also look for the overall mitigation potential of the country and the relative and respective to the relative sector. The detailed criteria were shown there. So now we move to the second general criteria, which is feasibility. Here we make reference to the readiness of the proposed outline for implementation. And by readiness, I mean preparedness for implementation. Here we refer to the readiness of the financial mechanism, which should ideally be ready within 1 year of the start of the implementation phase, and of the policy or regulatory reforms. The diagram here shows some of the factors to be taken into account when designing the appropriate financial instrument for the NSP. For instance, the phase-out concept is an important issue which allows us to assess how the NSP achieves the permanent transformational effect that we seek after the funding has ceased. Again, please make use of the lessons learned. Here we can show you the outcomes of the financial workshop that was held last May in Bonn, and we hope that you will find this useful. The first sub-criterion is the NSP rationale, the project rationale. Here it's very important to have a sound and plausible barrier analysis, which shows, for example, on the technological or the regulatory side, what could be overcome in terms of the interests and behaviors of investors, be they companies or consumers. Having analyzed the barriers to transformational change, the next question is to what extent the proposed project can actually tackle those. To clarify here, what we want to do is to work on programs which have significant policy and regulatory reforms rather than which work on minor or incremental aspects. So please do look at ways of tackling these barriers and not working around them. We attach here special importance to the risk analysis and the mitigation measures attached to that, and the indicators that allow us to verify that the project is on track and it's likely that the ambitious goals will be reached. The final aspect we look at is the justification of the additionality of the NAMA facility funds. Here the question is, does the NAMA facility funding make a difference? Does the facility's funding cover the incremental costs for mitigation? Or does it just simply fund the whole project? Is there a lack of overlap? Is there a risk of overlap with the existing public funding, or a possibility that there may be crowding out of commercial financing? We now move to the second criteria, which, as you can see, has the most marks accorded to it, 13. This project design addresses exactly how the NSP, including regulatory measures, financial mechanisms, technology shifts, capacity building, how this plans to tackle the key barriers and achieve the transformational change in the sector. Here there are a number of important aspects involved. An appropriate institutional setup needs to be described that brings the relevant actors on board and considers how negatively affected stakeholders, for example, waste pickers in a waste management project, or individual taxi drivers in a urban transport project, would be included in the program design. Technologies must be feasible and tested in the country or in the region. Our experience has shown that to date, technological pilots tend to score poorly here. The business model at the investment level must be plausible. It needs to be demonstrated that the private sector or the end users that are to change their behavior or to adopt the technology or invest in new technology are sufficiently incentivized to take on the risk and or accept the high cost of the carbon investment which is envisaged. The financing mechanisms, as stated previously, must be adequate in order to provide sufficient incentive to the participants in the market, but also to efficiently use the limited funding that we provide. The last feasibility criteria is the concept of the DPP, which we've mentioned several times. This allows the proponents to develop the concept to be implementation ready. The concept should show what needs to be done in-house and where additional expertise, for example, financial competence, needs to be brought in. We've already mentioned in this context the availability of an expert pool. What we would like to see in this phase, in this DPP phase, is that the applicant has a clear understanding of the detailed activities for project preparation. For example, an adequate focus, that it's comprehensive, i.e. complete and cohesive, realistic timelines, and the appropriateness of the requested funding. The DPP phase will also be part of the on-site assessment for those projects that have passed the desk evaluation and were approved for an on-site assessment by the donors. It's possible that at this occasion the concept may need to be adjusted and will certainly be discussed.
Thanks very much, Ash, for providing these insights on the assessment criteria. After this part with key requirements of the current call, let's have a look at the questions that came in the meantime before we move on to the last part covering the outline template. With the view to the time, I would suggest that we maybe only take 2 questions in this part and then move on. So the first one would be, is there a ratio regarding the emission reduction? In other words, the ratio between emission reduction and NAMA facility funding in euros that the NSP needs to achieve?
No, we don't have any benchmarks as such. This is very situation specific, depends very much on the sector, on the country, whether it's urban or rural, for example. So we don't have any benchmarks, as I say, but we do require the emission abatement cost to be cost effective and appropriate to the sector, which we will judge on the basis of the outline.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then last but not least, a question which keeps up coming again and again in each and every call, and that is if cross-border projects are eligible for funding.
Yes, we've had this one before. Yes, the answer is yes. Cross-border projects are permissible. However, we do need to have a solid rationale for why this should be supported. So, for example, several island states of a region may join forces within a project to aggregate an eligible funding volume. But we should note that we will evaluate each of the countries in the same way, for example, in terms of their level of commitment and so forth. So the answer is yes, cross-border projects are welcome, but they need to have a solid project rationale.
All right. And as a matter of fact, in our portfolio so far, we haven't got a project of this nature. Great. Thanks a lot, Ash, for these explanations. Now let's move on to the last part of today's webinar. I'll hand things over to my colleague Zach again, who will now guide us through the outline template.
Thank you, Søren. Let's now take a look at the sections of the outline template in the 5 required annexes. As an aside, please note that while only 5 of the annexes are required and will be covered in this webinar, completion of the 2 voluntary annexes is highly encouraged. The overall structure of the outline is unchanged from the fourth call. However, some additional guiding questions have been added in order for us to better gauge certain elements of the outline submissions. Furthermore, we suggest completed outlines to total about 20 pages or 10,000 words. Please keep in mind, though, that this is not hard and fast, but rather a guiding suggestion. So I'd like to start by posing a crucial question. Who is the applicant for our purposes here? Or who can actually submit this project outline to the NAMA facility? To answer that question, the applicant may be a national ministry or an entity that fulfills the eligibility and capacity criteria and receives endorsement from the national government. And I'm sure it goes without saying, but the outline should be submitted by a duly authorized representative of the applicant. In the first section of the outline, the respective ministry that corresponds to the relevant sector or line ministry should be identified, and a ministry contact person should be listed. We do expect that the outline submission has support from the ministry in charge of climate change and UNFCCC negotiations, and if this is not the ministry already identified as the first or primary ministry, it should also be identified under the section for a second national ministry, along with a relevant contact person. To be clear, we do expect endorsement letters from both ministries, but we will revisit that topic later when we review the outline. Now let's take a closer look at some of the other important actors or groups involved in the outline process. In addition to the national ministries, central roles are given to what we call the applicant or applicant support partner, the implementing partners, and the NAMA support organization. Let's now take a closer look at the functions of these roles and each one's eligibility requirements. Let's start with the applicant or applicant support partner. If the applicant is a national ministry, then a partner applicant, which we call an applicant support partner, must be identified and included. As Janke explained earlier, the applicant support partner acts as the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase and is a legal entity that should have sufficient capacity and experience to ensure a sound detailed preparation of the NSP. However, we want to stress that the applicant support partner does not necessarily need to have the capacities and experience necessary for the NSP implementation. If the applicant support partner receives sufficient endorsement from the relevant national ministries, it can function as the applicant and submit the outline to the NAMA facility. In this case, the applicant support partner will become the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase. The applicant support partner must fulfill a set of capacity requirements that can be found in Chapter 5 of the GID. These capacity requirements are much less stringent for those required of the detailed preparation phase's contracting partner than they are for the actual NSP implementation's contracting partner. With that, the legal entity serving as applicant or applicant support partner can be different from the legal entity designated as the NAMA support organization for NSP implementation. Please pay special attention to the applicant or applicant support partner box on this slide. It contains an overview of the detailed requirements for this role. Once again, you can find this information and the rest of the requirements for the position in the general information document. Please note that if the necessary expertise cannot be provided by one single organization, there is an option to form a consortium. In that case, the consortium must demonstrate that it fulfills the stipulated criteria, and a lead partner from this group must be identified and indicated. Next, let's take a look at another important actor involved in this process, the NAMA support organization. The NSO will be the contracting partner for the NSP implementation. As mentioned, we apply more demanding eligibility criteria to the NAMA support organization. However, in the outline, we simply expect information indicating which institution is designated NAMA support organization. This means that NSP should demonstrate that they have an idea of who could be an appropriate NAMA support organization, but the outline will not be disqualified in the outline phase for any reason related to the NAMA support organization selection. The NAMA support organization will actually be assessed and discussed during the on-site assessment, and the final suitability determination will be undertaken and finalized by the latest at the beginning of the detailed preparation phase. Examples of NAMA support organizations include regional or international development banks, UN and multi and bilateral development agencies, NGOs and foundations, national development banks or funds, public utilities or agencies, and national foundations. The NAMA support organization cannot be a private for-profit institution, and it does need to fulfill the capacity criteria specified in Chapter 5 of the General Information Document. And lastly, on this slide, implementing partners are key national partners, in addition to the previously mentioned national ministries involved in the NSP implementation process. Implementing partners are existing entities with specific mandates and relevant experience for the implementation and operation of the NAMA. The list of implementing partners might be extended if necessary. If a national organization were to apply as an NSO, the implementing partner and NSO might be the same. NSOs must include national implementing partners with a specific national mandate for implementation unless the NSO itself has such a mandate. It is recommended that the NSO be formally linked with the implementation partner, for example through cooperation agreements, memoranda of understanding, or other agreements that specify their respective roles and responsibilities. Examples of typical implementing partners include national sector ministries and other public or private entities and financial institutions, such as a national development bank or the Ministry of Finance. Implementing partners are expected to be existing entities with the aforementioned required national mandate, and they're also expected to possess the relevant experience needed to implement and operate NAMAs. Now let's move on to section 2. The first part of this section provides space for a general introduction of the proposed NSP, along with the inclusion of a barrier analysis. The questions and accompanying text here in this section are simply presented to help guide you as you develop a description of the NSP. On the left of this slide, there are links to helpful tools and documents that we have on our website. You can find the tools later by clicking the links in the presentation that we will distribute following this webinar. We strongly encourage that you review this information and these tools to prepare the outline submission. The second part of section 2 contains space for the elaboration of crucial features of the NSP, the first of which contends with facets of the project concept. The first part of this should include details surrounding the kind of technology and the business model proposed for the NSP. As Ash mentioned, we consider a convincing business model that incorporates the proposed technologies crucial to the broader impacts of the NSPs. In prior calls, many outline submissions failed to deliver adequate data in this section. Please be sure to provide a well thought out model supported by robust data, quantitative and otherwise. From here, the technology and business model are important in building up to the identification and introduction of the proper financial support mechanism. Once again, we would like to stress that a sound financial mechanism is a central piece and should be presented as clearly and with the greatest extent of detail as possible. The NAMA facility focuses on enabling transformative investments, not on technical assistance. Embeddedness is also a crucial element of an NSP. The NAMA facility considers NAMAs to be implementation vehicles for nationally determined contributions in the context of the Paris Agreement. Therefore, the linkage of the NSP to the NDC is very important and should be clearly demonstrated. Last but certainly not least here, sustainable development co-benefits are seen as an important driver for change in a country. Therefore, co-benefits must be integrated into the information on the embeddedness of the NSP. Moving on, Section 3 is intended to present in detail the NSP's ambition potential for transformational change, financial ambition, and mitigation potential. We strongly recommend considering the M&E guidance and tools provided by the NAMA facility, the links to which you can find on the left side of the slide, both now and following the webinar. Please note that there is a direct link between the financial ambition from private, public, and other donor sources and the financing structure of the NSP as shown in the next section and on the next slide. Furthermore, we do highly encourage the submission of the optional Annex A and Annex B for that matter, where direct and indirect mitigation potential can be indicated. Here in section 4 of the outline, we would expect to see the hard numbers of your financial ambition, at least those that would be considered directly mobilized by the NSP. If the NSP is projected to deviate from the recommended NAMA facility funding range, which is between 5 and 20 million euros, it would be appropriate here to provide justification for the granting of such an exception by the NAMA facility. To that end, please note that for the NAMA facility's fifth call, the 5 to 20 million euro funding range is slightly more flexible than in the past calls, as we mentioned. Again, please simply provide the rationale for any funding range deviations. Now, if you foresee more than one financial mechanism, please also specify any additional ones in the table and indicate the individual financing source. Make sure that in your cost structure you also include your overheads, possible taxes, and expenditures for monitoring, communication, and so on. Please note that 1% of the requested NAMA facility funding for implementation shall be reserved for NSP evaluation. The evaluation budget will be centrally tendered and commissioned for all NSPs. Okay, so now that we've gone through the outline, let's also have a quick look at the required annexes that should be submitted along with the outline. In Annex 1 here, we expect endorsement letters from the national ministries that we've already identified in the outline. That is the sector ministry and the ministry responsible for climate change. We would like to stress that endorsement letters are much more than a formal requirement. They give an idea of the level of political and possibly also financial commitment of the national political partners. The content of these letters is carefully studied and considered during the assessment of the outline. Endorsement letters should be in English or at least accompanied by an English translation. Annex 2, the log frame, is a planning instrument for project development with which most of you should be familiar. It likely goes without saying that the log frame and the main body of the outline should be consistent. The log frame should show all relevant assumptions and risks for the NSP to reach its outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Indicators should refer to the NAMA facility's mandatory core and sector indicators and include respective target values. In this Annex 3, you're asked to provide information and references regarding the legal entity that serves as the applicant or applicant support partner, which is to become the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase. This information will be used to assess whether the proposed applicant fulfills the capacity requirements. It's therefore very important that relevant references and information are provided. In Annex 4, the concept for the detailed preparation phase should be presented. Note that the DPP was already introduced during this presentation by Janke. Again, the DPP process consists of 2 phases, with progression to the second contingent upon the successful completion of the first. The detailed preparation phase concept should demonstrate a clear plan of how to develop a sound, full-fledged proposal, including the identification of questions and issues that remain unaddressed. It should also identify central stakeholders for the project preparation, as well as the resources and methods that are needed. Note that the concept should include a budget and Gantt chart for the detailed preparation phase. In Annex 5, you're asked to provide information and references on the NAMA support organization. Again, at this stage, the NSO selection is not necessarily fixed, and what's expected here is simply general information about the chosen NSO, as can be seen on the slide. Again, the NSO selection will be considered and evaluated in more detail during the on-site assessment or at the start of the detailed preparation phase. Please note that if the proposed applicant or applicant support partner and NSO are the same legal entity, there is no need to complete Annex 5. Moving on to optional Annexes A and B, please note that these are found in the 5th call application documents as 2 separate Excel files. And while these annexes are optional, we do encourage applicants to complete them as thoroughly as possible. Annex A provides space for the calculation of the NSP's mitigation potential, including assumed reductions from a business as usual baseline. In Annex B, you can break down the connection between the NSP's business model and the features of the financial mechanism. This annex will enable a better elaboration of the suitable financial mechanism and an assessment of the project's economic viability. Furthermore, please note that this annex also provides space for a detailing of the project's phase-out concept, which commences at the end of the NAMA facility's implementation support period. please be sure to not overlook the fact that the Excel file containing Annex B has 3 sheets in total. So that was the overview of the new outline templates annexes. It should also be understood that these templates should only be used for applications to the 5th call of the NAMA facility. And of course, you can find these templates on the NAMA facility's website under calls for projects. The submission deadline is the 15th of March, 2018. Please submit the complete outline with all annexes in English to the NAMA facility's email address.
Thanks a lot, Zach, for this introduction to the application documents. With the view to the time, it seems that we are this time around, for the first time ever in the webinar, overshooting. Our apologies for that, but I see that most of you are still hanging in there, so please bear with us. We are almost done. We have a last Q&A session now, which I believe is worth listening in, and we should be done within the next 5 minutes. Great. I would pick up directly the next question and read it out. How strict are you on the word count, and can we add additional information like feasibility study as further annex?
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, so as I said before, the word count is not a hard criterion, but it's rather meant as guidance. But our experience actually suggests that it's definitely possible to put all essential information into 10,000 words. So you might remember that the assessment does take place in a short period of time, so concise information is of course appreciated. And as for the additional annexes beyond the requested ones, we definitely expect to see the essential information in the outline itself. So we can't guarantee to take into account any additional annexes during the assessment process.
All right, thanks for that. Next one, do we need support letters from NAMA support organizations, main implementing partners, and the applicant support partner?
Yeah, good question. For the submission of the outline, you do not. Endorsement letters do only need to be provided from the relevant ministries of the applying government for our purposes here.
Okay, then let's maybe pick up one last question. Will the submission, an individual submission, score lower in the assessment if the optional annexes A and B are not submitted?
Yeah, well, these are new for this call. So it really can only be beneficial for your application if you provide these annexes. They just help us better understand the assumptions and calculations made, but no submission will be disqualified for not submitting.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Zach. I think we have some approximately 35 questions which we received now and we could not address as we've mentioned before. We will get back to you individually with responses and also pick up these questions in the clarification notes. We wanted to show you a last slide with the links where you can see an overview showcasing some of the most important documents which we have been covering in today's webinar. Again, don't forget that this presentation, along with links to these documents, will be uploaded and is accessible as a PDF also at the end of this webinar. Okay, I think then we are covered. We can close the webinar. I'd like to thank my colleagues for providing information. Last but not least, some housekeeping messages. You will be provided with a link to the documentation of the webinar per separate email. For more information on the NAMA facility, of course, and to register for the NAMA facility newsletter, please visit our website. Thanks very much for your participation in this webinar. We will have the next webinar on the 31st of January 2018. And with that, we would like to wish you a good day from wintry but sunny Berlin. Have a nice day. Bye.